Hey guys, so I've never tried this, so be patient with me. But what I did was I took a picture of this plaster mold, and I'm going to make a drawing on the left side of the screen. What I've done with that green line that just popped up over the plaster mold is that represents my unit of measurement. And when I draw a portrait, I usually rely on an eye as my first unit of measurement. So what I did was I placed that line from the inside corner to the outside corner. Then I came over to my drawing, and now I'm just going to establish essentially the planes around the brow and the eyelid and the ocular cavity. And you can see I've just thrown in the line of the lid there so that I can pop up another line and make that unit of measurement. Now it's not a one-to-one from my drawing to my reference. Just like you guys did with the boxes or some of your other measuring and sighting practices, the unit of measure is independent, meaning it is one-to-one on the drawing, not from the reference to the drawing. So knowing that there's about a single unit of measurement or an eye between the two eyes, that's why I've moved that green line over. And now I'm just, again, generalizing, looking at my reference, keeping my eyes more on the image of the plaster mold than on my drawing. And I'm just trying to kind of pin it down. And now I'm moving the green lines over so that I can make sure that I'm staying relatively in proportion. So whenever I draw a face, I'm thinking more about the skull. So I'm trying to represent the ocular cavity, or the hole in the skull that the eye sits in. And that's why I start so much with the planes underneath. And you can see, thankfully I'm time lapsing because Photoshop was giving me a real hard time. So using that eye as a single measurement, we can take and turn that down 90 degrees. And when we do, that unit of measurement lands like right on the side of the nose. So it right on the side of the wing of the nostril, essentially on the tip of the nose. And I want to be careful about saying that because it is different for each individual, but it's a good way to generalize and then define the plane under the nose. And that's not the cast shadow, and you're going to see me pop that in just a second as well. But I'm talking about from the tip of your nose back to your top lip or your philtrum. And what you're looking at there, this block of shadow shape that I put under the nose, you'll see right there, I just popped in a little bit of the nostril, and that's all going to change, but it's just to identify where things are. And right there, that's that cast shadow that lives underneath the nose. So now I'm trying to differentiate in my drawing as much as I can with my reference just the general planes, the idea of where these things are and what direction they head. And that's, you can see in my mark making, and this is just my obviously first pass, but you can see that anything that's pulling back toward the face, that's a vertical line. The lines that wrap around the ocular cavity, they turn a little bit. And so they kind of wrap in toward the insides in order to create depth. Whereas something like the flatter plane right here across the bridge of the nose is going to be a horizontal line because I'm not trying to create depth. And so here I've created the first 2 out of the 5 areas of shadow that define the face. And I'm going to move on to the next, which is the top lip. Okay, so right there, what I'm doing is I'm taking and measuring the top lip, or the philtrum, snot shoot as I like to call it. And that conveniently is roughly the same size as the height of an eye. And this is all through trial and error. You just practice and see what fits what. So what I did, I reverse engineered it in my drawing. I measured roughly the height of that eye, and then I took that measurement, duplicated, and now I drop it down to that philtrum. And likewise, I'm going to drag some guides in. And this would be with a physical drawing where you take a pencil and you kind of line things up with the pencil vertically, and then you snap a line or drop a vertical down to represent where you want something to line up. So we know that the nose lines up with the inside corners of the eye, more roughly. And then the other rough measurement that we can make is that the lips go almost halfway across each eye. And you can see actually my pencil drawing on Photoshop catching those guides and making some kind of janky lines in there. But carry on from there, I drop my measurement down, and again, rough measurement right around the same height as I used for the top lip. The philtrum is the height for both top and bottom lips. And then again, I'll come in and place my cast shadow off of that bottom lip. And here's where I got annoyed with my crooked lines. So I've got my contour established for each lip as well as the cast shadow underneath. And I'm going to go in and actually add value to the top lip to show that it is a plane that turns away from the light. And I use those vertical marks again to kind of carve back. I'm thinking like a kind of a three-dimensional sense. I want to actually draw them down or back and away from that top plane that's represented by the philtrum. And I do the same underneath the bottom lip, because you can see in this mold, she kind of has like a pouty bottom lip. So that shadow is quite deep. So I take vertical lines and I really try to think of it sculpturally and think about actually carving that notch out underneath that bottom lip to create shadow in a three-dimensional sense. And in much the same way, I'm just thinking about going around some of these areas where I'm starting to notice some darker values, really kind of just making mental notes to myself of things that I want to establish further along in the drawing. And so right there, like, you know, making a little bit of a darker value on that under shelf of the nose, because now I've got darker values under the bottom lip there. And so I'm starting to push myself to kind of realize how far I'm going to end up pushing some of these darks in the end, or closer to the end of the drawing. And one thing you have to remember is that, you know, when we're looking at a time lapse like this, you're dealing with an hour and a half of drawing. This isn't something that actually happened in 23 minutes. So it's a lot of kind of assessing each area of the drawing, going back to it, and each time I'm trying to build upon what I put down and keep my marks kind of directional to think about, again, that sculptural quality. If I were carving this out, I want to make it look like things are coming up and over a ridge, or if it's a softer thing, is it rolling over a larger plane? So there you can see I'm actually popping in the cast shadow that comes from the top lip down onto the bottom lip. And if you notice, now that you look at that corner of the mouth versus the other corner, and there's the other corner, it creates a lot of depth in a very short period of time. So just starting to pin in some of my values and understand where my true darks are going to be. And that's by no means the final pass again. Now I'm starting to kind of go back in and feather in some cross hatching. Here I'm going to work over the nose quite a bit. And on that bridge, I'm going to arc over, thinking again like sculpturally, right? So it's kind of like a bit of a softer roll over the bridge of the nose, and then pushing down into the shadows on the sides of the nose, thinking if I were actually, you know, carving this out of stone, I'd be chiseling back in that direction from the rise in the nose down to the plane of the cheek. And now I'm just going to do some kind of general cleanup and a little bit of adding the value into what I would refer to as like the secondary shadows around the eye. Just thinking about some areas that are a little more subtle, like this crease right here that begins to show where the eyelid actually begins its fold and roll over into the crease. Little bits around the edges of the shadow of the nose there onto the cheek plane. And then also a quick reminder to myself that there's a little bit of reflected light right on the nostril, and I don't want to lose that information because otherwise I'm going to kind of lose the definition in the nostril. And then just paying close attention to what the edges of the lips look like, as they're really more defined by value than they are by line. And then I kind of bounce right back up to that cast shadow under the nose. You're going to see I work my way back up the bridge of the nose on the side, and then back up around to the eye. And what I'm looking for on that side, I've got a lot of my darkest values in that particular area, like the crease of the eye, which I'm about to push into. And then on that right side, our right side of the eye, just pushing that down and around more. So I'm really trying to work the drawing over. And I know I keep on saying this, but I'm trying to think about bringing all of my value relationships up, or all of my values up at the same time, so that I can begin to see everything as a full drawing. So it's always interesting to watch yourself draw. And this is like an even crazier experience because, you know, you can take video of something, but to see it happen in the digital format, it's something like if you have an iPad that can do this, that can screen capture, and then you can watch how you made something, it's actually just as informative as watching somebody else do it. You kind of get a feel for your own process, the mistakes that you've made. And of course, just like if you were watching your own, right now, all I'm paying attention to is my own mistakes. I'm looking at as if it's a third person perspective. I'm like, why isn't he doing this? So here I picked up a little bit of a wider brush, or, you know, in my mind, this would be representative of a pencil that's a little bit softer. So when we draw with the ebony pencils versus like a 4H or a 2H hard pencil. And so I'm just starting to kind of establish in. Sometimes I'll even take like a soft, dry paintbrush, and I'll whisk over the top of the surface. You can always take like a little piece of sponge. Some people use tissue. I'd watch out because aloe sometimes in the tissues, or other lotions are in tissues, and they can kind of ruin your surface or just make it a lot harder to work. And here's where I'm going to actually take the surface and make it a little bit of an off-white. It's just too stark to look at in a bright white. The white background of a Photoshop document is, in my opinion, particularly because it's a screen that's backlit, it's just way more intense than even a piece of paper. And so I just kind of gave it a little bit of a tone. And you can see there I was just, I'm kind of chipping around the nose, both on the dark side and right there on the light side, trying to wrap the contour and also, you know, bring a lot of depth to it, because the nose stands out off of the face further, obviously, than any other feature. And lips are also, they have a lot of depth to them. So knowing that I'm going to find some of my larger areas of shadow in these two features, kind of get a little honed in and focused on them, but I will bounce back and forth because some of the value relationships between the shadows on the nose and the shadows on the mouth, those are very, very similar. And so I'm kind of trying to establish for myself, at least within that face, where the darkest areas are going to be, keeping in mind that, you know, I'm only, 45, 50 minutes into this, and it's going to continue even further. Being that we're getting into hours of drawing now, the entire drawing itself is already over 6 or 7 hours long. So it's, you know, getting into like what you would consider project length. But, you know, some of these studies are really, really valuable, even for me. It's so informative to be able to look at something and bring it up to a full range of value, as opposed to, you know, not challenging myself and not putting down value even on the white surfaces or the spaces that you would typically consider a white. So a lot of these things that you see me kind of digging into right here, it's the deepening of values, but then you'll also see me like go in and kind of feather the edges of things, where I'll work with little marks that are kind of like flicking marks around the edges of an area. And actually, this is the attempt in the reverse on the side of the nose, taking an eraser, like you would with a kneaded eraser, kind of roll it up into a little point, and then whisk around the edges of something, because you want to be careful about making really dark, hard edges around things, particularly when that edge is defined by light. And you can see on that plaster, really the right side, our right side of that nose, is defined by light. And so I'm trying not to put a really dark line around it. There's a shadow around the outside of it, but I'm looking for that edge of the nose itself to be a bit of a light within shadow. And so right in here, I'm going around, and like I was saying about kind of feathering. So now I'm pushing a lot of my values on that eyelid in a little bit, or up and over, because that eyelid in the drawing right now is very, very flat. But when you look at that reference piece, it rolls over the same way as we looked at a drawing of an egg or a drawing of a sphere. And you want those edges to be soft right up around when it comes down out of the ocular cavity, and then obviously over the dark side off to the right. So see that right there, what I just did? Went in and softened the edge around that brow line, or as the brow comes up out of the ocular cavity, because what we're looking at is the mold of a female face. That is going to be a lot more subtle, and particularly with this face, the model's face is far more subtle across the brow region. So I want to be careful to not make that edge as hard as it is in my initial layout sketch. So I'm just evaluating between the mold and my drawing, and reminding myself, to tend to it at a further point. I know I'm never really going to go full tilt on it. And I know there's kind of that notion of like, well, then what's the point? Again, it's just establishing things so that you don't end up with a situation where you're too dark too soon on something. Like when you look at the shadow underneath the mouth right now, or the shadow around the top lip, it feels kind of out of place. They almost feel like they're a different drawing. And I try to avoid that when I'm working in this capacity. There will be other times that I'll go in and, chip into something and really, really like resolve or finish something. But that's also primarily left for things that I've got a drawing laid out already. This is that process of observational drawing where I don't have a full layout for everything. I'm building it up slowly. And it's just one technique. I mean, there are a multitude of ways of doing this. You've got to find what's comfortable for you. And I think even for me, my process shifted a little bit because it's a digital drawing, and I was kind of thinking about, talking through this, as obscure as it is. I was trying to consider how I would instruct the actual lesson after I recorded the drawing and whether or not I would time lapse it. And of course, I made the decision to because it's probably painful enough for you to listen to me talk for this long. And I'm not doing it to torture you as much as it might seem like that. I'm doing it because I think that this is the best way to give you kind of an idea in one quick shot of how to draw a face. Rather than having you sit in front of a mirror the way that I traditionally would and walk through this step by step, or having a model sit in front of you, being able to lay this out, and particularly putting my drawing side by side with the reference and having you follow along, I think that's really a good way to be able to focus on those shadow shapes, the 5 areas of shadow that define the face, as well as thinking about the planes of the face, and then in that sculptural way that I keep on referencing. So even if you want to go back through this and just mute me, I welcome it. But stop it where you think it's important for you to stop and kind of catch up on the parts of the drawing, because I think that's what's really valuable. Me talking through this may or may not have an impact on you, but what I'm hoping is that you being able to see the process itself developing and understand a little bit of the why, that's the most important part. The next video is going to be basically pure time lapse, and that way you're just going to be able to know what I'm doing when you see a green line pop up, and kind of go from there and just follow along. So I thank you guys. I appreciate you checking this out. All right, see ya.